All right, so getting back to the videos, the demos here. So this is the hall table. Getting along with it pretty well there. You can see the drawers in the front. Shelf down at the bottom is pretty much ready to go. Got the top initial coats of finish on it. Again, I like to pre-finish those. Let me bring the camera over here and I'll kind of explain why. Back up. Alright, it's kind of hard to see. So the thing I'm going to work on today is demo is finishing up, doing some details on the ends of these breadboard ends. So that's about as close as I'm going to get at the moment. But typical green, they had a offset on different surfaces about an eighth of an inch from everything. So what I mean by that is we've got the field of our top here. Breadboard end is a little bit thicker, so it rises above the top an eighth of an inch. It's longer on either side by an eighth of an inch. Same thing happens with the drawers. I think we can kind of still see them here a little bit. So the drawers sit in an eighth of an inch. The finger joints on the end, they sit out about an eighth of an inch. Let's see if I can pull this drawer out of here. Get the other one. And the wax is a little bit. There we go. Not quite moving so well. All right, so again, so here's, talk about the drawer a little bit. So there's the drawer front. You can see the finger joints. Those are sitting about an eighth of an inch proud from the face. Some dowels to lock in the sides. And then the rest of the drawer front. So dovetails on the back, finger joints on the front. That is the dados for the hardwood runner I got on the inside. Then again, solid drawer bottom. It's kind of hard to see here, but see if I can bring it in. So back's held in with a screw, and I just cut a little wedge in there or notch in there for the screw to sit flush. And then the hole for the screw is a little elongated, so as this panel, the bottom panel, moves, it has a little room to move with it. That's pretty much, sort of the drawers. I'll talk a little bit more about how I hung the drawers with that runner. And another student had some questions for one of her projects about a different way to hang drawers other than what we did with that first table in Furniture 1. But back on topic, so we're going to do the breadboard ends. I'm going to move the camera back. Let me pull those breadboard ends off and I'll show you what we're going to wind up doing. This is where I'm going to be working on things, and so that stack of stuff over there is a lot of the Macassar ebony that I need to do a lot of these plugs and details with. So I just dumped my little box of scraps, and I'll be picking through those to sort of get the parts that I need. So, all right. So what I need to do is make sure you can see this. So here I have the two breadboard ends. So one I've already finished, so you can see my sort of square mortises here. This is where that screw is going to go insert in there. Comes out the back in my slot. This is the slot for my loose spline. I say loose only because it's not integral to the top or the breadboard end. I cut a dado on both pieces, the tabletop, the field, and the breadboard ends. Then that loose spline is glued in. Again, the spline is glued in for maybe the first 4 or 5 inches on both sides, And then on the tabletop, it will not be glued in the rest of this on the breadboard end. But on the tabletop, I have a gap where this screw is, and I showed you in another video where I put a hardwood sort of dowel plug. So the screw is able to get into sort of long grain rather than just end grain. It doesn't won't sit as solid in end grain. It has a tendency to pull out. So that long grain will hold the screw a little bit better. And the reason I do that is because this part of the breadboard end is not going to be glued to the top. But I'd like to have something holding the ends of the breadboard tight to the field of the top. So that's why these screws are in here, and this is kind of in keeping with Charles and Henry Green, the methods that they used. And then I'll put an ebony plug on the outside of this, and I have not gotten to that one yet. The spline here, that one is just merely decorative. And I'll show you how I cut that one on the other one. And so this is a piece of the Mexar ebony that I've got milled already, and you can see I'm not going to push it all the way home because I want to be able to get that thing back out of there. And that'll sit on there. And again, this spline will sit 1/8 of an inch proud of the end. So again, this sort of detail that carries out through all throughout the whole of the green pieces. This again, every surface is offset. Every joining a surface is offset by 1/8 of an inch. And then we have the cloud lifts, the rounded over finger joints and that type of stuff. So they're very consistent on sort of keeping all these sort of details. Again, this is not a reproduction of green, but here I've got the cloud lift in the end of the breadboard end. That cloud lift is also on the stretchers that hold up the shelf and repeated on the shelf itself. And of course we got the ebony plugs that are at all the sort of joints. And on this piece, those plugs will be actually holding in the tendons as well as being decorative. So what I'm going to do right now is show you guys first how I cut these, and then we'll go ahead and show you how I do the hole for the spline. And at some point when I glue this on, there's going to be another ebony spline that will cover this slot on both the breadboard end and the tabletop. So, but let's go ahead and start with this. I'll show you how I cut these holes. So just a hand screw vise, lock down, just so this is a little bit easier to deal with. Let me bring it over here. Okay, bring it down. Okay, so you can see where I've got my mortise marked. So I've got those marked on both locations. So this is the little doohickey I'm going to be using for cutting these. This is sort of a plug punch that Daryl Pert came up with. Lee Valley manufactures these and sell these. But basically what we have here is kind of a mimic of a hollow chisel for a hollow chisel mortiser. So we've got the sort of sharpened points, sort of the conical relief on the inside. The difference with this thing is obviously we don't have to go very deep, not nearly as deep as we would with a hollow chisel mortiser. So the cutting portion of this is a lot shorter, but then the rest of this is a lot beefier and smaller to be able to handle. It needs to be beefier here because I'm going to wind up hitting the end of this, pounding it into the material with a hammer. And then it unscrews here, so if I have one of the smaller ones, then I have enough room for a short bit to actually draw out the hole as I'm pounding this home. So it kind of works similar to a hollow chisel, but instead of being mounted in a rotary sort of mechanism, either on a drill press or in a mortiser. We do this by hand, so I can either drill or pound on the end of it. I can't do both at the same time. But again, these are designed by Daryl Pert, manufactured by Lee Valley Veritas, and they come in several different sizes. I think I've got 3/16, 1/4 inch, and 3/8, and those are the ones that I use most of the time. I think there's one or two other sizes. I'll try to post a link to those. So anyhow, be real careful about setting this thing up. I'm going to use my combination square just to make sure I'm square to the surfaces and wasn't exactly located where I wanted to, so let's move it real quick. So that looks pretty good. Alright, so carefully holding this thing in place. Start putting it home. Put the right bit into my drill. And go home a little bit. And pound it down some more. So this is kind of what I've got at the moment. Let's see. Whoops. Stop that. Okay, so there's where I'm at the moment. So I'll keep doing this. Move back here. So doing the measurements, I need to go down about 1/2 inch in order to get my screw plenty of clearance. I want to be careful about not drilling this hole down too far. I could probably go down a good bit more than that, but I think that's pretty good. So at the moment now I have the cutting portion of this this tool almost quite bottomed out. What I want to be careful of, and again I'll show you here, is where the silver part is. That's pretty much where I can cut down to. If I go beyond that, then this sort of rounded over relief here, this will start to sort of mangle my square hole. So I want to avoid that. So that looks pretty good. I have a little chisel here, hang on. So now what I'm just going to do is clean up the bottom of this hole a little bit. About 1/2 inch. You go just a little deeper. Just make sure I got that hole where I need to. Put that back in and go just a little bit further. That'll do it. Okay. So let me show you the hole I've got for the moment. So there's where we're at. Okay. So now what I need to do is drill out a hole for the clearance of the shaft for the screw. So I need to put a different bit into this thing, my drill. And what I want to be careful of in this, I don't want the threads of the screw to engage in my breadboard end. I want those threads to clear easily through that hole. I don't want it, the hole too loose, but I want them to not have, like I said, not engage in my breadboard end, because if they engage in the breadboard end, that screw's going to start to pull in my breadboard end. And then when it gets to the tabletop, or that dowel that I've got in my tabletop, it might not seat those two as well as I want them to. So it's better if this screw passes cleanly through the hole in my breadboard end. That way the shaft will pull it nice and tight as the threads engage in the dowel. Hopefully that makes more sense. Again, the whole idea behind this is to keep this breadboard end nice and tight to that tabletop, but still allow it to move. And if I have the threads engaged in the breadboard end, that's not optimal. So the bit I have is just slightly thicker than the shaft on my screw. Obviously, then it's thicker than the threads as well. So I've already got a sort of pilot point in there from the brad point bit. So all I need to do is just drill through. Okay. Looks like I'm not quite all the way through, so let me fix that. Okay, there we go. And you can see I've got a little bit of wiggle room. So as that top expands, the screw has a little bit of room to move around. So it's not going to pull the screw out. So that's good for that. So now let's go over to the rudder table and I'll show you how I cut the spline for this. Alright. So what I've got in here in the router table is my sort of winged cutter. This one's got 3 wings. So I forget where I got this one from. Infinity Tools has a nice set of these, but here's what the sort of set comes with. So you obviously get the 1/2-inch arbor that mounts to the wings mount to and then inserts into your router table. I've got like a 1/16 inch cutter. I think the one I have on there is the 1/4 inch and the 1/8. Actually, I think it might be a little bit less than the 1/8. I forget what it is. I think that's the 1/8. Something else and whatever. Then I've got a whole bunch of other different size washers, so I can use these as shims if you know, sort of decrease or increase the spacing between the 2 cutters. The bearing I have on here at the moment will create a 1/2 inch depth of cut. I think this bearing didn't come with the kit, but I bought it extra. It's a bit wider, about twice as wide as the bit on there, so it reduces the depth of cut to a 1/4 inch. So if I want to use it for frame a panel or something like that, and I don't need a 1/2 inch deep dado, I can switch that out. But what I did is I already got my calipers out, and the stack I've got on here, I don't know if it's exactly 3/8 of an inch. I don't think it is. Let me remember what it was. It was 0.354, so you know, sort of a little under. So actually, is that right? 2.25.365 is 3/8 of an inch. Okay, so a little under than 3/8 of an inch. But I set it exactly for the thickness of the stock I had for my ebony. So I had this piece already milled from a previous project, and it's pretty close to 3/8 of an inch. Yeah, I think it's just about a 32nd shy, but I set the stack of the bits so it's exactly this. So backtrack here a little bit. One reason I like the Macassar ebony over something maybe like Gaboon ebony is the Macassar still looks like wood. So I have some nice sort of, you know, grain differentiation here, a bit more color. I found with the Gaboon, it looks pure black. If you think, you know, sort of about the old pianos, when they used to call those, you know, the keys ebony and ivory, they used Gaboon ebony for those, and you can tell they're just absolutely pure black. And while that, you know, is fine for a lot of things, I think in the green pieces, or at least for my preference, that pure black just doesn't look like wood anymore. It looks like it could be a piece of plastic. Could be, you know, sort of polished phenolic, which I have on top of my router table. So I like to have, you know, so those ebony plugs look a little more like wood, or obviously look like wood. So I find the Macassar is a little more conducive to sort of that look. And then all I do is put a little bit of wax on these ebony plugs. Again, if I put some finish on it, then they turn a little bit too sort of consistent black color. And again, that's, as I said, that's not really what I'm looking for. So anyhow, back to this. So the bit's on here, router's plugged in. I got my my foot pedal that I will use. I've got my starting pin, and I have sort of my terminuses on my breadboard end marks. So there's my stop and start. So I want to cut from this one to here, and be very careful. I get that pretty darn close. You know, it doesn't have to be dead on because nobody's gonna, you know, compare the two breadboard ends. But I've got some stock already cut pretty close to this length, so I'd like to try to be use that and be as close as possible. Already have the height set, so it matches where my hole is. And again, since I had the square recessed for my plug, it's easy to use that to sort of set the height of the bit. So engage the workpiece on starting pin, engage it into the bit. Keep an eye on sort of that where that placement is on the edge of that bit. Once I get my workpiece fully engaged into the bearing, then I want to come off the starting pin. So generally you want to be either on the starting pin or on the bearing. You don't want to be fully engaged in the bit and then still on the starting pin. It's sort of not ideal. So let me put my ear protection on, and I'll go ahead and make this cut. So there's the relief. You can see I've got this little wedge in here because there's a little bit of space between those two wings, but that's not that big a deal. So I'm going to go back over to the bench, and what I'd like to do is, hopefully you can see this, you know, because obviously we've got a round cutter, so this relief, that this cut I made in here, it arcs off to the bottom and then arcs back up. I want a little bit more sort of depth on the ends, so I need to do that by hand with a chisel. So let's go do that real quick. So it just so happens that I think maybe that's why I milled this stuff as the one size is one of my Japanese chisels is exactly the right width, so I'm guessing this is about 14-15 mil Japanese chisel. So happens to fit in here almost exactly the right width. So down.